The McKinsey way of working to solve business problems. In Part 1, we looked at the way McKinsey thinks about business problems and uses fact-based, hypothesis-driven, structured analysis to arrive at solutions for its clients. In Part 2, we will see how the firm implements its problem-solving model on a day-to-day basis. We will go through a McKinsey engagement in chronological order, starting with the selling, or, in McKinsey's case, non-selling, process, progressing to organizing a team, conducting research, and brainstorming. The goal in Part 2 is for you to experience what it's like to participate in a typical McKinsey study. I hope, however, that, unlike a typical McKinsey engagement, it won't take you 6 months of working until 1 a.m. to finish it. 4. Selling a study. About the selling process at McKinsey. The selling process at McKinsey differs from that of most organizations because, as any McKinseyite will tell you, the firm doesn't sell. The firm may not sell, but it certainly brings in a continuing and growing volume of business, so there's something to be learned from the way McKinsey gets itself through its clients' doors. Getting your foot through the door is only half the battle when marketing your skills as a problem solver, however. You also have to put together your problem-solving package in a way that ensures your success. McKinsey has learned a thing or two about that as well. In this chapter, we will look at the zen of McKinsey salesmanship and learn how to trim a problem-solving project to a manageable size and scope. How to sell without selling. Business problems are like mice. They go unnoticed until they start nibbling your cheese. Just building a better mousetrap will not make the world beat a path to your door. People who don't have mice won't be interested, until the mice show up, then they need to know you have the mousetrap. This might sound like the musings of a Zen monk, or perhaps a management consultant from California. But sometimes the right way to sell your product or service is not to barge into your customer's home with a bunch of free Sam please. Just be there, at the right time, and make sure the right people know who you are. At around 10 one evening, I went up to the office of Dominic, the partner on my team, to drop off some documents that I knew he wanted to see in the morning. To my surprise, he was still at his desk. When I asked what kept him so late, he told me he had a beauty parade for a prospective client the next morning. Good luck, I told him as I left. I hope you sell them on this one. No, he replied. Remember, McKinsey doesn't sell. This dictum may sound strange. How could a company grow to the size of McKinsey without selling? But it is true. This curious aspect of McKinsey's culture stems from the roots of the firm's founders in white shoe, law and accounting firms before World War II. In those days, it was considered beneath the dignity of professional service firms to advertise or solicit business. Times may have changed, but the no-selling legacy persists at McKinsey because it works very well in the consulting business. No senior McKinsey directors make cold calls at the offices of Bill Gates and Ted Turner asking if they have problems they want solved. The firm does not run ads in Forbes or Barron's advertise ing 50% off telecommunications consulting. Although a partner's compensation depends in large part on the amount of business he brings to the firm, no one goes out to knock on doors. The firm waits for the phone to ring. And ring it does, not because McKinsey sells, but because McKinsey markets. It does this in several different ways, all of them designed to make sure that on the day a senior executive decides she has a business problem, one of the first calls she makes is to the local office of McKinsey. The firm produces a steady stream of books and articles, some of them extremely influential, such as the famous In Search of Excellence by Peters and Waterman. McKinsey also publishes its own scholarly journal, the McKinsey Quarterly, which it sends gratis to its clients, as well as to its former consultants, many of whom now occupy senior positions at potential clients. The firm invites, and gets, a lot of coverage by journalists. Many McKinsey partners and directors are internationally known as experts in their fields. Examples are Lo L. Bryan, who has advised congressional banking committees, and Kenichi Ami, who recently left the firm, the Bizine. Thomas J. Peters and Robert H. Waterman, Jr., In Search of Excellence, Lessons from America's Best-Run Companies, New York, Harper & Row, 1982. Occasional meetings with former clients allow partners not only to check up on the effects of past McKinsey projects, but to make sure that the firm maintains some share of mind should new problems arise at the client. These efforts could not be construed as selling, but they make sure that the right people know the firm is there. That keeps the phones ringing. If you're in sales, then you probably do have to make the cold calls. For some people that is the fun of selling. But even the best foot-in-the-door saleswoman needs to market. You may not be on the same charitable board as billionaire investor Warren Buffett, but you can still find ways to network with existing and potential clients and customers. Trade shows and conferences, even the right bars, will give you the chance to make sure they know who you are. Does your particular field have a trade journal? These magazines are always looking for copy from industry insiders. Write a good article and you will get your name in front of people who would otherwise never have heard of you. Meet your competitors too. Today's competitor could change jobs and become tomorrow's customer. Make sure he knows you. It all adds up to making sure your name is the one your customers think of when they have a need you can fill. 52. Working to solve business problems. Be careful what you promise. Structuring an engagement. When structuring your project, whether you are selling your services as a consultant or have been picked by your organization to solve an internal problem, don't bite off more than you can chew. Set definite milestones that you can meet. That way, you'll have targets you can achieve and your client will be satisfied. When clients come to McKinsey with a problem, they want it fixed yesterday and for nothing. Fortunately, most clients realize that this desire is just slightly unrealistic. Still, when structuring an engagement, McKinsey, usually in the person of a DCS** or ED, faces a lot of pressure to deliver the maximum results in the minimum time. McKinsey bills by the hour, and those hours do not come cheap. The ED, or whoever is structuring the engagement, stands between the client and its demands on one side, and the engagement team on the other. The team can be pushed only so far for so long before the quality of its work begins to decline. McKinsey consultants, in general, work very hard over the course of a study, but they do have limits. They also have lives, which they would like, at least occasionally, to live. The challenge for the ED is to balance the desires and budget constraints of the client with the limits of the team. The ideal synthesis of these two opposing forces is a project that a team of 4 to 6 consultants can calm. Selling a study. 53. Director of Client Services, aka Director. The DCS is in charge of the overall relationship with a client. Directors have a larger stake in the firm than mere partners. The DCS is the highest rung of the McKinsey hierarchy. Complete in 3 to 6 months and that will produce tangible results for the client. As the firm spends time within a client organization, it almost always uncovers new problems that could benefit from McKinsey's expertise. These problems, however, must be addressed at another time and in another engagement. Consequently, McKinsey engagements tend to generate new business of their own accord. Thus, as long as the client is happy with the results that the firm produces, McKinsey is likely to have a stream of new business, for which it often will not need to compete. As an organization, McKinsey is extremely good at figuring out how much a team can do over the length of a typical study. The best EDs can balance the competing demands of client and team to a nicety. They tell the client, we're going to do X and Y. We could do Z, but it would kill the team, while telling the team, look, we've already promised the client that we would do Z, so we've got to deliver. They then work the team to its limit while simultaneously making the client feel that he is getting value for money and exceeding his expectations. Of course, not every ED is that good. In my time at the firm, certain EDs had reputations for overpromising to the client and then putting their teams through hell. They were to be avoided, along with EDs who were vague about the exact nature of the end product of a study and left the team to figure out just what it was supposed to do. What lessons does the McKinsey experience give for the way you should structure your problem-solving project? If you are a consultant putting together a proposal for an outside client, then the answer is simple: don't bite off more than you and your team can chew and know what your end product is going to be. If your boss steps into your office and says, "We have a little problem and we want you to head up a team to solve it," then the 54 working to solve business problems lesson for you is a bit more complicated. Don't blithely accept the assignment and say, "Sure, boss." If you do, you could be setting yourself up for a fall. Before you go hot-footing it in search of a solution, get a feel for the scope of the problem. Is it something you and your team can solve in the time allotted? If not, either get more time or, even better, sit down with your boss and break the problem down into bite-sized chunks. Figure out what the end product of each chunk will be: a recommendation, an implementation plan, a new product design, and so forth. Figure out what resources you will need to reach your goal and get a commitment from your boss that you will have them. Doing all this ahead of time can save you a lot of grief a few months down the road. Structuring your project properly at the beginning may not guarantee your success, but it at least gets you off to the right start. 5. Assembling a team. About teams at McKinsey. At McKinsey, you never walk alone, or, at least, you never work alone. Everything at the firm happens in teams, from frontline work on client engagements all the way up to firm-wide decision-making. The smallest team I ever worked on consisted of me and my EM on a pro bono engagement for a New York theater company. At the other end of the scale, the firm's largest clients might have several 5- or 6-person teams working on site at one time. Together, these form a meta team. In the early 1990s, members of the AT&T Meta team decided to get together to discuss their work. The firm's headquarters didn't have a room large enough to hold them all, so they had to book a New Jersey hotel. McKinsey relies on teams because they are the best way to solve the problems that the firm's clients face. The complexity of these problems makes it impossible for one person to solve them, at least to the firm's high standards. More people mean more hands to gather and analyze data. And, more important, more minds to figure out what the data really mean. If you face complex problems in your business, you should probably put together a team to help solve them too. In the face of complexity, many hands don't just make light work, they make for a better result. The firm has developed a number of strategies for putting together and maintaining high-performance teams. In this chapter, you will learn how to select the right people for your team. You will also discover some tricks for keeping your team happy and productive under pressure. Getting the mix right. You can't just throw 4 random people at a problem and expect them to solve it. Think about what sorts of skills and personalities will work best for your project. Then choose your teammates carefully. To succeed as a business problem solver, you must choose your team carefully, getting the best mix of people from the resources you have available. McKinsey benefits from a global pool of talented, intelligent individuals whose strengths and weaknesses the firm tracks closely. Even with this advantage, EMs and EDs must learn the art of team selection. Their experiences can help you, even if you can't call on the same level of resources. McKinseyite subscribe to one of 2 theories of team selection. The first theory states that intellectual horsepower is everything. Find the smartest people for your team regardless of their experience or personal hygiene. The second theory says that what really matters is specific experience and skills. Intelligence is a given within the firm, every McKinsey consultant is smart or he wouldn't be there. Neither of these theories is completely correct, but neither of them is completely wrong either. Proper team selection varies from problem to problem and client to client. Some problems will yield only to large amounts of analytical firepower. For instance, if you have mountains of complex data that you need to decipher, then you want the 2 or 3 best number crunchers that you can find, regardless of whether they can simultaneously walk and chew gum. On the other hand, if you are managing a big reorganization during which many sensitive decisions will have to be made, you assembling a team 59 would prefer to have someone on your team with good people skills and experience in implementing change. Another important team selection lesson emerges from the McKinsey team assignment process. When an engagement begins, the EM and ED pick their associates from the pool of available resources at the time. The manager of associate development, or the office manager, will tell them who is available and give them a sheet listing each associate's experience and rating each one on analytical ability, client management skills, and so forth. The biggest mistake in team selection comes from taking those ratings at face value. A smart EM always talks to potential team members before taking them on. By extension, if you are in a position to pick your team MEM bears before embarking on a project, never just accept people who are supposed to be good. Meet them face to face. Talk to them, see what's behind the recommendations. Maybe in her last assignment, Sally just got lucky. Or maybe Pete's the CEO's nephew and his last boss was scared to tell the truth about him. Of course, if he is the CEO's nephew, you may be stuck with him. Maybe Carol's brilliant, but after spending 15 minutes talking to her, you know she would drive you crazy if she were on your team. Just remember, if you are lucky enough to be able to choose whom you will work with, choose wisely. A little team bonding goes a long way. It's a truism that a team will perform better and its members will have a better time if the team members get along well. As a team leader, you should make an effort to promote team bonding, just make sure it doesn't become a chore. For McKinseyites, team bonding activities are a given. In the course of an engagement, you expect to go out at least a few times to the nicest restaurants in town, or to see a show or a game on McKinsey's, and, eventually, the client's nickel. One ED even took his whole team to Florida for a long weekend. As a team leader, the question for you is how much formal team bonding is enough. After talking with a number of former McKinseyites, and reflecting on my own experience, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the answer is not much. A little team bonding goes a long way. As a team leader, you have the far more important job of looking after team morale. See the next section. Former SEM Abe Bleiberg put it like this: I'm not sure that team bonding is all that important. What's important is that a team works together well, and that will come or not over the course of a project. It's also important that individuals feel respected and that they feel that their ideas are respected. Team bonding is not, did you take your team to enough dinners? Did you go out to the movies? Did you go to the circus? Most people, even very hardworking people, want to have a life, to be with their families. I think that's more important than going out to the circus. Assembling a team 61. If a team is going to bond, it will mostly bond through work. A typical McKinsey team works at the client for 10 to 14 hours a day, plus a day over the weekend at the office. That's plenty of time for bonding. Also, on an out-of-town study, team members will eat dinner together more often than not. Why, as a team leader, would you want to take up yet more of their time? If the team isn't bonding, how is a fancy dinner going to help? Will it make a bad work experience good? So, when managing your team, be selective with team bond ing activities. Try to get your team's significant others involved. This will help them understand what their loved ones, your teammates, are doing, and it will help you understand your teammates. Above all, respect your teammates' time. One former associate noted that, at McKinsey, the best team dinners were at lunch. They showed that the EM knew the associates had lives. Take your team's temperature to maintain morale. Maintaining your team's morale is an ongoing responsibility. If you don't do it, your team will not perform well. Make sure you know how your team feels. In my time at McKinsey, I worked on 2 studies that didn't turn out well. Both studies were charged with client politics. The McKinsey team became a football kicked between rival factions at the client. After one of the studies, I recognized that we hadn't succeeded and I was ready to move on to the next engagement. 62 working to solve business problems. After the other, I was ready to leave the firm. Why the different reactions? Team morale. My bad DM, who shall remain nameless, managed by the mushroom method, cover them with manure and keep them in the dark. We associates never felt that we knew what was going on. I never got a sense that what I was doing was valuable either to the team or to the client. My good DM, on the other hand, always let us know what was going on, and if he didn't know, Vic told us so. We knew about the client politics, we understood it, and that made it easier for us to work with it. Also, I knew that Vic's door was always open and that he was pulling for us as much as for the client. What's the secret to maintaining team morale? There isn't one, just a few simple rules to remember. Take your team's temperature. Talk to your teammates. Make sure they are happy with what they are doing. Find out if they have questions about what they are doing or why they are doing it, and answer them. If they are unhappy, take remedial action quickly. Steer a steady course. If you change your mind all the time about the team's priorities or the analyses you're doing, your team will quickly become confused and demoralized. Know where you're going and stay your course. If you need an extra day to figure it out, take it. If you need to make a big change, let your team know, explain why, and let people contribute to, or at least see, your thought process. Let your teammates know why they are doing what they're doing. People want to feel that what they are doing is adding value to the client. There are few things more demoralizing than doing something that you and your team leader know is valueless. No. Assembling a team 63. I didn't. I went skiing in Vail for a week instead. I felt better after that. Both EMs eventually made partner, a comment, perhaps, on which skills the firm values most in its EDs. One on your team should ever feel, I've just spent 2 weeks of my life for nothing. Treat your teammates with respect. There is no excuse for treating people with disrespect, it's completely unprofessional. Respect doesn't just mean politeness. It means remembering that your teammates may have different priorities than you do, and that they may have lives outside of work. You may like to work until midnight 6 days a week, but your team may have better things to do. There will be times, of course, when the team must work all hours, but be sure it really is one of those times before you call a team meeting at 10 p.m. Respect also means never asking someone to do something you wouldn't do or haven't done yourself. As an associate, I always felt a bit better knowing that if I was in the office at midnight, my EM was too. Get to know your teammates as people. Are they married? Do they have kids? What are their hobbies? It will help you to understand them. Share a bit about yourself as well, that makes it more likely that your teammates will think of you as part of us rather than them. This, incidentally, is a much better way of team bonding than taking your team out to the ball game. When the going gets tough, take the Bill Clinton approach. Sometimes, as in my 2 bad experiences, you will be dealt a bad hand. The problem is difficult, the client is difficult. There's not a lot you can do beyond telling your team, I feel your pain. At some point, you have to soldier on, that's life. Spending months solving complex business problems is no bed of roses. If you follow the rules on maintaining morale, however, at least your team won't feel like resigning when it's all over. 6. Managing hierarchy. About the McKinsey chain of command. McKinsey has something of a split personality when it comes to hierarchy. On the one hand, the firm claims that it has no real hierarchy. On the other hand, any McKinseyite past or present can tell you that two hierarchies, at least, exist within McKinsey. Both statements are correct. I cannot imagine a flatter organization than McKinsey. I could, as an associate, walk into my ED's office without an appointment and talk to him about our study. In meetings at the firm, every idea, whether it comes from the youngest business analyst or the oldest director, carries the same weight and is debated and attacked accordingly. At least that's the way it's supposed to be, and usually is. At the same time, McKinsey has a definite chain of command. The directors and, to a lesser extent, the partners make decisions about the direction of the firm, and the EMs, associates, analysts, and support staff live with them. If I disagreed with my EM over an issue, at the end of the day, his opinion won out. Likewise, my ED's opinion trumped my EM's. Then, McKinsey has another, unofficial hierarchy, one based on experience and credentials, how good you are, or are perceived to be. At each level, certain people were known to be stars. Stellar associates could pick and choose their assignments, while hot EMs had associates clamoring to work for them, and everyone sought out the best EDs and DCSs as mentors and career makers. On the other hand, associates who performed poorly didn't last very long at the firm. After one bad engagement, no EM or ED would want them on the team. Likewise, the associates generally knew which EMs to avoid and which EDs had missed the firm's fast track. Every organization has its own approach to hierarchy. Your own may look nothing at all like the firm's. Still, every McKinseyite has learned a few lessons about dealing with hierarchy that should work in any organization. They can help you stay out of trouble and get ahead. Make your boss look good. If you make your boss look good, your boss will make you look good. That's the quid pro quo of hierarchy. I was a first-year associate and I just spent several weeks putting together a comprehensive competitor analysis for my client. When it came time to share my findings with the senior management of a very hierarchical manufacturing company, I was too green to make the presentation. My EM got the job instead. I was disappointed, but I understood the rationale behind the decision. It then became my job, over the course of several hours, to make my EM as conversant with my analysis as I was. The next day, he delivered the presentation very convincingly. When the client asked questions, my EM answered them. All the while, I was writing him notes, whispering facts in his ear, and pointing out important pages in the presentation document. The client was suitably impressed with the presentation and with my EM. My EM, my boss, and my ED, my boss's boss, were impressed with me. I had done my job and the firm would know about it. In any hierarchical organization, the most important person in your world, day in and day out, is your boss. When you work in teams, away from the main office, in a distant city or foreign country, that importance increases by an order of magnitude. Your boss may be the only person in your organization who can see you. You'd better make her happy. The best way to do that is to make her look good. Making your boss look good means two things. Firstly, it means doing your job to the best of your ability. Clearly, if you produce high-quality work, it will make your boss's job easier. Managing hierarchy 67. Second, make sure your boss knows everything you know when she needs to know it. Keep the information flowing. Make sure your boss knows where you are, what you are doing, and what problems you may be having. At the same time, don't overload her with information. Think about what your boss needs or wants to know. Use a well-structured email or voicemail to convey the information. Getting these things right helps you as much as it helps your boss. To paraphrase a famous hairdresser, if your boss looks good, you look good. An aggressive strategy for managing hierarchy. If you have the stomach for it, assert your equality in the organization. Keep on doing it until someone tells you otherwise. Obviously, this is not a strategy for everyone. Hamish McDermott, a newly hired associate fresh from a graduate degree in philosophy at Cambridge, found himself assigned to an internal research project, what McKinsey calls practice development, or PD, for Lowell Bryan, a director of the firm and a very imposing presence. Lowell had just finished the second chapter of a book on bank failures and asked Hamish and the rest of the team for their comments. Hamish took Lowell at his word and proceeded to write an account of all the logical flaws in the chapter. As Hamish remembers it, there I was, after a week at the firm, showing the head of the finance practice exactly where he was being logically 68 working to solve business problems. Inconsistent and where his arguments were failing. Of course, I had used a very dry, superior tone, as if it were an exam question at Cambridge. So-and-so has made a valiant effort to expound his thesis, but failed for the following 16 reasons. Lowell was working out of town at the time, and Hamish faxed his comments directly to him, without showing them to his EM. In many firms, this would have been enough to get Hamish the sack, but Lowell was fine with it. Hamish's EM later meant that maybe he should have been more careful about the tone of his comments. In fact, when the book came out, Lowell gave Hamish a copy inscribed with the message, "Thanks for all your help, especially with Chapter 2. Hamish went on to have a very successful career at the firm. This story shows that, in a meritocratic organization at least, you can assert your equality until shown otherwise, until someone tells you, "No, you have to do what I tell you." You'll find it's rare for that to happen. As Hamish said, "It sounds extreme, but in a way, to be a successful consultant, you have to assert yourself. Very often, you'll be in a situation where you just have to assume that you can do something, or talk to someone, or get access to some bit of information, even though you may not have the explicit authority to do so. This is a risky strategy, and the more hierarchical an organization tie-in, the riskier it becomes. In a more rigid organization, be more sensitive of where the limits to others' authority lie. And be ready to back down quickly, otherwise, someone will stomp on you." 7. Doing research. About research at McKinsey. The McKinsey problem-solving process begins with research. Before a team can construct an initial hypothesis, before it can disaggregate a problem into its components and uncover the key drivers, it has to have information. At the start of a McKinseyite's career, most of his time is spent gathering data, whether from one of the firm's libraries, from McKinsey's many databases, or from the internet. Gathering, filtering, and analyzing data is the skill exercised most by new associates. As a result, McKinseyites have learned a number of tricks for jump-starting their research. You can use these tricks to find the answers to your business problem too. Don't reinvent the wheel, Part 2. Whatever the problem, chances are that someone, somewhere, has worked on something similar. Maybe that person is in your organization and can answer all your questions in the course of a phone call. Maybe other people in your field, in another division or another company, have seen the same problem already. Find out who they are and get to know them. Do your research and ask questions. You will save yourself a lot of time and effort. Your time is valuable, so don't waste it by reinventing the wheel. McKinsey keeps an electronic database called PDNet** containing reports from recent engagements and internal research. When I was a first-year associate, one of my jobs at the start of an engagement was to search PDNet for anything that would shed light on our current project, comparable industries, comparable problems. Inevitably, any PDNet query produced a mountain of documents that I then had to wade through to find the few that might be relevant. Still, this long days, and, as often as not, nights, work usually yielded something to point us in the right direction. McKinsey has other resources that help its consultants work smarter, not harder. These include an excellent business library that holds every business book or magazine you care to mention, it also has access to all the major commercial databases such as LexisNexis, Dun & Bradstreet, DataStream, and the Internet. Most important, the library has a dedicated staff of information. 72 working to solve business problems. Asterisk, an electronic database of all PD, practice development, work done by the firm. It includes internal research as well as findings from previous client work. For purposes of confidentiality, the firm disguises client names and data before storing anything on the system. Specialists who work extremely hard to supply the consultants with information, whether from PDNet, the library, or any other source. The firm also has a cadre of senior information specialists who are experts in particular industries. They were an especially valuable resource when we found ourselves working 1 month for a client in banking and the next for a jet engine manufacturer. In my first McKinsey engagement after joining the firm, our client, the financial arm of a very large computer hardware and software manufacturer, wanted advice on expanding internationally. The client especially wanted to understand how major foreign conglomerates maintained financial and managerial control of their offshore subsidiaries and what the pros and cons of their various methods were. My engagement manager put me in charge of that part of the project. I had 3 weeks to gain an intimate understanding of 4 of the world's largest conglomerates and to figure out what, if anything, our client could learn from them. I went to PDNet first. Fortunately for me, another McKinsey team had recently put together an organizational profile of one of the most complex of my subjects, Daimler-Benz. That afternoon I had in my hands what would have taken me a week's concentrated research. More important, I learned the names of the real experts on Daimler-Benz, whom I called with follow-up questions. I had that much more time to work on the other companies, and the team was able to produce a document that impressed our client. You may not have PDNet, but if you work in a large organization you probably have access to much of your company's corporate memory, databases, files, training manuals, and co-workers. Even if you're on your own, there is a huge stream of information out there for you to take advantage of. Trade magazines, Newspa. Doing research 73. Purse, data feeds, and, most important these days, the Internet. What about your local library? You will find loads of information and valuable resources there with a few hours digging. Get to know your competitors. Many business people will share some information on the principle that what goes around, comes around. If you're in, say, advertising, find the cafe in your city where other ad execs hang out. Tap into your industry's buzz. Whatever you're doing, chances are someone, somewhere has done something similar. Learn from others' successes and mistakes. Leverage your valuable time and don't reinvent the wheel. Specific research tips. Use these tried and tested tips to jumpstart your research. During my research for this book, I interviewed dozens of former McKinseyites. They gave me, along with structured answers to my specific questions, a number of tips and tricks to succeed in the various aspects of life at McKinsey. Here is a grab bag of tips to make your research more efficient and effective. Start with the annual report. If you want to get up to speed on a company as quickly as possible, the first place to turn is the annual report. It's easy to obtain. Many companies now post their annuals on the World Wide Web, and contains a great deal of information beyond the financial data. When you get a company's annual, turn first to the message to shareholders or chairman's remarks at the front. If you read the section carefully, and a little skeptically, you'll find out a lot about how the company has performed in the last year, where 74 working to solve business problems. Management hopes to take the company in the future, and the strategy for getting there. You'll usually also get a quick breakdown of key financial indicators such as stock price, revenue, and earnings per share. Go further into the annual, and you'll find out about the company's business units and product lines, who its senior managers are, and where the company has offices and production facilities. Then you can plow into the numbers. A company's annual report will get your research off to a rapid start. Look for outliers. When you've collected a large amount of data on a particular aspect of your problem, look for outliers, things that are especially good or bad. Use a computer to get a quick picture. For example, suppose you are collecting data on your company's sales force. Enter the average sales of each salesperson divided by the number of accounts served by that salesperson for, say, the last 3 years. This gives you the average sales per account. Type the data into your favorite spreadsheet software and sort the averages from lowest to highest. Then look at the 2 or 3 best and worst figures. Congratulations, you've just found a fruitful area for research. Figure out why the numbers are so good or bad and you'll be well on your way to fixing the problem. Look for best practice. There's an old saying that no matter how good you are at something, there's always somebody better. This is as true in business as it is anywhere else. Find out what the best performers in the industry are doing and imitate them. Often, this is the quickest antidote to poor performance. Usually, you can't find out about best practice in the library. You have to think creatively. If some of your competitors have best practice, they probably won't tell you their secrets. Talk to other people in the industry, suppliers, customers, Wall Street analysts, friends from business school, and so forth. Doing research 75. Sometimes you can find best practice within your company. Someone, some team, or some division is outperforming the rest of the company. Find out why. Figure out how to implement the top performers' secrets throughout your organization. The result will be a huge payoff to your business. Conducting interviews. About interviewing at McKinsey. In every McKinsey engagement, someone on the team will conduct an interview. In most engagements, the team will conduct lots of them. There is always someone who has information that the team needs, an executive at the client, a production line supervisor, a supplier, a customer, an industry expert, even a competitor. Interviewing is the way McKinsey consultants fill the gaps in their knowledge base and tap into the experience and knowledge of their clients. Interviewing is such an important part of the McKinsey problem-solving process that it merits its own chapter in this book, separate from research. You can learn a lot from Red ING magazine articles, books, and scholarly papers, but to get the nitty-gritty on an organization, you have to ask questions of and get answers from the people on the front line. Interviewing is a skill in its own right, and most people have no idea how to go about it. You might think that even though interviewing McKinsey style is a good technique for consultants who need to get up to speed on unfamiliar industries, it is of little use to executives in more settled positions. I disagree. In today's business world, no matter who you are, from the most junior of junior managers to the most senior of senior vice presidents, you may find yourself in a situation where you need the information in someone else's head. You might be assigned to a multifunctional team as part of a merger. You might be told to set up and run a new business. The possibilities are endless, but they all require you to pick someone's brain, chew the fat, or get up to speed. Call it what you like, it's an interview when you ask questions and get answers. In this chapter, I will take you through the interviewing process, from preparing your interview guide to writing your thank you note. If you read no other chapter of the book from start to finish, read this one. I think you'll learn something very valuable that you won't find elsewhere. 78 Working to solve business problems. Be prepared, write an interview guide. When you go into an interview, be prepared. You may have only 30 minutes with a person whom you may never see again. Know what you're going to ask. When I asked McKinsey alumni for their best advice on interviews, every single one of them said, write an interview guide. Many people resent being interviewed, or at least begrudge you the time that you are taking from their day. A guide is your best tool for getting what you want from interviewees and for McKinsey the best use of your time, and theirs. You must think on two levels when constructing your guide. First, and obviously, what are the questions to which you need answers? Write them all down in any order. Second, and more important, what do you really need from this interview? What are you trying to achieve? Why are you talking to this person? Defining your purpose will help you put your questions in the right order and phrase them correctly. It helps to know as much as possible about the interviewee in advance. Is she a prickly CEO who might bite your head off if you ask a sensitive question? Or is she a middle-level manager whose pleas for change in her organization have gone unheeded? Both might know the same piece of information, but you'd approach each one differently. At McKinsey we were taught that, as a rule, an interview should start with general questions and move on to specific ones. Don't dive right into a sensitive area like, what are your responsibilities, or how long have you been with the company? Start with anodyne questions about, say, the industry overall. Conducting interviews 79. This will help the interviewee warm up and allow you to develop rapport. When deciding on which questions to ask, you might want to include some to which you know the answer. This may sound counterintuitive, but it's really very useful. On questions of fact, asking a ringer will give you some insights into the interviewee's honesty and/or knowledge. For complex issues, you may think you know the answer, but there may be more than one. You should find out as many as possible. Once you've written your guide, look at it and ask yourself, what are the 3 things I most want to know by the end of the interview? These are the things you will focus on when you go into the interviewee's office, the 3 things that you will try your hardest to obtain before you leave. Sometimes you won't even get those answers, see difficult interviews later in the chapter, and sometimes they'll come easily. Anything more is gravy. Finally, every interview guide should conclude with what I call the prototypical McKinsey question. When you've asked all your questions, or you're running out of time, put away your guide and ask the interviewee if there's anything else he'd like to tell you or any question you forgot to ask. As often as not, the interviewee will say no, but every once in a while you'll strike pay dirt. Remember that, chances are, the people you interview know their organizations, their business units, or their departments better than you do. They may know which problems are eluding senior managers, who's pushing which agenda, or where the bones are buried. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll tell you. 80 Working to solve business problems. When conducting interviews, listen and guide. When you're picking people's brains, ask questions and then let them do the talking. Most people like to talk, especially if you let them know you're interested in what they're saying. Keep the interview on track by breaking in when necessary. McKinsey consultants receive a lot of training in interviewing techniques. The first thing we were taught was always let the interviewee know you are listening. We did this by filling the gaps in the interviewee's conversation with verbal placeholders such as yes or I see, and even just this particular choice I like to call the McKinsey grunt asterisk. May not seem like much, but it shows that you're paying attention, even when you're not, and it gives the other person a chance to gather his thoughts and catch his breath. We also learned to communicate our interest through body language. When the interviewee was speaking, we leaned toward her slightly. When she completed a sentence, we nodded. And we always took notes. Even if the interviewee was babbling, and this happened often enough, we had our notepads and pens out and wrote things down. Like the McKinsey grunt, note-taking implied we were paying attention and kept us prepared in case the interviewee did say something important. This technique could be carried too far, of course. According to one piece of firm lore, 2 consultants went to interview A. Conducting interviews 81. Asterisk I believe the McKinsey grunt has its origins in Japan. A conversation in Japanese is full of verbal placeholders such as hi, yes, a less polite form of yes, and so desu ka, really? The Japanese even have a word for this, izuchi, which refers to 2 swordsmiths hammering the same blade in turns. High-level executive at a client. The engagement manager made his introduction, then started asking questions. The executive answered in detail. All through this, the associate nodded and interjected with, "Yes, and I see," while taking notes at a furious pace, just as he had been taught, but he never asked any questions himself. The EM asked follow-up questions and the associate just kept on nodding and saying, When the interview ended, the EM thanked the executive for his time and the two consultants got up to leave. As they were shaking hands, the executive pointed to the associate and asked the EM, "Does he speak English?" When McKinsey consultants conduct interviews, it's because they want access to the information, experience, and anecdotes in other person's heads. Consultants are there to listen, not to talk. They need to remember that the other person has a separate agenda, and needs to be kept on track. The process can sometimes prove difficult. I once had to interview a purchasing manager from a client's plant in Idaho. He knew all about the plant suppliers, customers, input requirements, and manufacturing processes, but all he cared about was fishing, fly fishing. Did I fly fish? He wanted to know. I should try it. If I was ever in the Pocatello area, he could set me up. You get the picture. I felt a bit bad getting him off his favorite subject, but I was there to get information, not swap fish stories. The main thing to remember when trying to get information from others is that they need to feel you are listening and that you're interested in what they have to say. Use positive body language and always take notes. One final trick: if you want people to say more than they have, if you think they have left out something important but you're not sure what it is, say nothing. Let the silence hang. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so do most people. Chances are they will start talking, just to fill the gap. If they have 82 working to solve business problems, been giving you a prepared script, they will probably drop it, because the one thing they were not prepared for was silence. Try it and see. It's surprisingly effective. 7 tips for successful interviewing. Always think strategically when conducting an interview. You have a goal to reach and limited time to reach it. Here are 7 tried and tested stratagems to help you get what you want from an interviewee. 1. Have the interviewee's boss set up the meeting. Going through the boss tells the interviewee that the interview is important. He'll be less likely to jerk you around if he knows his boss wants him to talk to you. 2. Interview in pairs. It's very difficult to conduct an effective interview on your own. You may be so busy taking notes that it becomes difficult to ask the right questions. You may miss non-verbal clues that the interviewee is giving. Sometimes, it is useful for a pair of interviewers to tag team, switch roles from case tie-in poser to note-taker during the session. The approach is especially effective when one of the interviewers has specific knowledge on certain issues that will be covered. Furthermore, it is always useful to have 2 different views of what actually happened in the interview. Just make sure that whoever writes up the interview notes corroborates them with the other interviewer. 3. Listen, don't lead. In most interviews, you are not looking for yes or no answers to your questions. You want exhaustive answers, as much information as possible. The way to get them. Conducting interviews 83 is to listen. Talk as little as possible, just enough to keep the interview on track. Remember that the interviewee probably knows a lot more about her business than you do, and most of the information she gives you will be useful one way or another. Here's another trick for keeping the information flowing. Ask open-ended questions. If you ask yes or no or multiple choice questions, that's all you will get. For example, suppose you want to find out when a store's busiest season is. You think it is either summer or winter, but you're not sure. If you ask the store manager, "Is your busiest season summer or winter?" she might say summer, she might say winter, or she might say, "Actually, it's spring," in which case, you've just highlighted your lack of knowledge about her business. If you ask her, "What is your busiest season?" she will give you the answer, and probably in more detail than if you gave her multiple choice. For example, we're busiest in the spring, specifically at Easter. By asking the open-ended question, you get a much better result. 4. Paraphrase, paraphrase, paraphrase. Before going out on interviews, every McKinsey consultant is trained to repeat back a subject's answers in slightly different form. I cannot overstress how important this is. Most people do not think or speak in a completely structured way. They ramble, they digress, they jumble important facts among irrelevancies. If you repeat their own words back to them, ideally with some structure applied, then they can tell you whether you understood them correctly. Paraphrasing also gives the interviewee a chance to add information or amplify important points. 5. Use the indirect approach. An EM had on his team a new associate, fresh out of the Navy. The two had put together a very clear interview guide and had agreed on a specific set of goals for an interview with a middle-level manager at their client, so the EM let the associate take the lead. The associate proceeded to grill the manager aggressively in order to get precisely what he wanted, as 84 working to solve business problems. If it were an interrogation rather than an interview. As you might imagine, the interviewee was rattled. He became defensive and essentially refused to cooperate. The moral of this tale is, be sensitive to the interviewee's feelings. Understand that the person may feel threatened. Don't dive right into the tough questions. If you have to dance around the important issues for a few minutes, that's okay. Take time to make the interviewee comfortable with you and the interview process. For an in-depth discussion, see the next section. 6. Don't ask for too much. There are 2 reasons not to ask for everything the interviewee has. First, you might get it. When you write your interview guide, you narrow down your goals to the 2 or 3 most important questions. If you then ask the interviewee for the sum total of his knowledge of the widget industry, you may find yourself wading through a lot of information to get what you really need, if you even find it at all. Second, you want to stop short of the straw that breaks the camel's back. Remember, being interviewed, especially in the context of a business problem, is an uncomfortable experience for many. If you compound that discomfort by pressing too hard, you may find that the interviewee becomes uncooperative or even hostile. You never know when you may want to come back to this person for more information, so don't shut the door. 7. Adopt the Columbo tactic. If you watched TV in the 1970s, you may remember Peter Falk's trenchcoat wearing detective, Lieutenant Columbo. After he finished quizzing a murder suspect about her whereabouts on the night in question, he would pick up his rumpled raincoat and head out the door. As he reached the threshold and was about to leave, he would turn around, stick his finger up to his temple, and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, but there's something I forgot to ask." This question invariably gave Columbo the answer he needed to figure out who did it. Conducting interviews. 85. If there's a particular question you need the answer to, or a piece of data that you want, the Columbo tactic is often a good way to get it. Once the interview is over, everybody becomes more relaxed. The interviewee's sense that you have some power over him will have disappeared. He is far less likely to be defensive, and will often tell you what you need or give you the information you seek on the spot. Try it, it works. You might also want to try the Super Columbo tactic. Instead of turning around at the door, wait until a day or 2 has passed, then drop by the interviewee's office. You were just passing by and remembered a question you forgot to ask. Again, this makes you much less threatening, and makes it more likely that you will get the information you need. Don't leave the interviewee naked. Remember that, for many people, being interviewed about problems in their job or business can be unnerving. You have a responsibility to be sensitive to their fears. It's not only the right thing to do, it makes good business sense too. A McKinsey associate and his ED went to interview a middle-level manager at a large pharmaceuticals company that the firm was helping to restructure. The man had been with the company for 20 years, now he was terrified that McKinsey would get him fired. When the consultants came into his office, he was sweating bullets. After introductions were made, he asked the consultants if they would like some coffee. He had a Mr. Coffee on his credenza. He went to pick up the pot to pour, but he couldn't, his hands were 86 working to solve business problems. Shaking too much. He put the pot down and tried again, still no good. Finally, he had to place the rim of the cup hard against the brim of the pot to get the coffee out. I offer this story to show just how unsettling an interview can be. As the interviewer, someone who is investigating a business problem, you carry power and authority. Not over a CEO or a top-level manager perhaps, but over many others. Imagine what you represent to, say, a store manager whose boss told her to talk to you and who knows there are problems in her organization. I believe you have a professional responsibility to respect the interviewee's anxiety, to allay it, and not to take advantage of it. Respecting the interviewee's anxiety means not leaving him feeling naked at the end of the interview, as if he's been the subject of a military interrogation. Remember that you're looking for just 2 or 3 things in any interview. You shouldn't need to squeeze an interviewee dry to get them. Also, be circumspect about asking questions that, though perfectly appropriate in a business context, may touch on deeply personal matters from the interviewee's perspective. For example, your first question should probably not be, "So, what is it that you do, exactly?" Allaying the fears of interviewees means demonstrating how the process benefits them, not just the interview, but the whole process of solving the organization's problems. If you make their job more efficient, that should benefit them. Likewise, if you improve the profitability of their employer, that might work to their advantage too. Don't be afraid to offer a quid pro quo. Interviewees are giving you information. If you have information that you can share with them, do so. Most people would rather know more about what is going on in their organization. Not taking advantage of the interviewee's fears means resist the temptation to use the power of the interview as a blunt instrument. Most of the time, an interviewee is willing to help. Conducting interviews 87. There is no need, in the first instance, to flash your authority like a police badge. If you do that, you may find that, like a gangster in an old cops and robbers movie, the interviewee clams up. If you run into real obstruction or hostility, see the next section, you may have to bring your authority into play, but not until then. Along with power comes the responsibility to use it wisely. Difficult interviews. Conduct enough interviews and you will encounter difficult ones. Some of them are easy enough to handle, once you know how. Others will test your strength and spirit. A major New York brokerage house, worried that it was lagging its rivals in profitability, called in McKinsey to do a complete review of its many businesses. The stakes for the company and its executives were high, the prospect of mass firings loomed. The VAR-ES players in the organization squared off into pro- and anti-McKinsey camps and promoted their agendas vigorously. Hamish McDermott, a newly promoted EM, had scheduled a meeting with one of the broker's senior managers and his management team. He walked into the man's office and introduced himself. The man replied, "Hamish McDermott, You're that's been telling the board I've been refusing to meet my cost reduction target." Sometime in your career, if you aggressively pursue solutions to business problems, you will run into a situation like Hamish's. How do you handle this kind of outright hostility in an interviewee? Here's how Hamish did it. 88 working to solve business problems. His words were pretty shocking to me, especially since they weren't true. But I didn't get angry and I didn't back down. I simply explained that I thought he was mistaken and said that we still had to have our meeting. He did it partly because he was a difficult guy and partly to see if we would back down. If someone says something blatantly false like that, you have to challenge him, you can't back down. This strategy worked very well for us. Afterward, several of his staff came and apologized that we had been insulted in this way. They thought we had handled it with a great deal of dignity and strength. We established credibility with a number of important people in the organization, and that helped us later on. The limits to this strategy are the limits of your authority in the organization. McKinsey consultants usually have the back ing of the top management at the client and can thus stand up to anyone. If you aren't so favored, just remember that if the person you are interviewing is more senior than the person who authorized your project, you will probably have to back down when challenged. A less hostile, but equally difficult situation arises when interviewees refuse to give you information. They won't answer your question or give you access to relevant documents or data. When this happens, it is time to pull rank. If you're there asking them questions, then someone in your organization, or your client, wants you to be there. Let them know that. If they still refuse, play hardball. If necessary, call the boss on the phone there and then. You probably won't have to, just the suggestion should open the information floodgates. You're not in the schoolyard any longer. No one will call you a tattletale. Conducting interviews 89. You may also encounter difficulty when interviewing what psychiatrists might call the passive-aggressive type, but I like to call the sandbagger. Sandbaggers will talk all you want, they just won't tell you anything, as one former McKinsey EM found out. I walked into this woman's office. We had blocked out an hour for the interview, and she told me that she could give me only half an hour. She then proceeded to talk for the next 30 minutes about what she thought McKinsey did and why it was that McKinsey was there. When she ran out of steam on that topic, she told me the story of her life. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Handling a sandbagger requires an indirect approach. Often the most useful strategy is finding someone else in the organization who can tell you what you want to know. If the sandbagger is the only source for the information, then you may have to ask her boss to have a quiet word with her. The last category of difficult interview is also the hardest to handle. I can think of few more stressful situations than being face to face with someone who knows your work will likely get him fired, and you know it too. Unfortunately, there is very little you can do in such cases apart from playing the good soldier. You have to do your job, and you have to get the interviewee to help you. It's for the good of the organization. You can't become angry or upset, despite the unfairness of it all. In a way, there is no effective strategy. You just have to reach down inside yourself and push on through. No one ever said life was fair. 90. Working to solve business problems. Always write a thank you note. When you get back to your office after interviewing someone, take the time to write a thank you letter. It's polite and professional, and could pay you back in unexpected ways. If your mother was like my mother, then when you were a kid you were always told to write a thank you note after you received a gift. I have a large extended family, so after holidays and birthdays I spent what seemed like weeks writing letters to aunts and uncles and second cousins thanking them for whatever it was they had sent me, whether I liked it or not. My mom would always be after me, making sure I wrote those thank you notes, as well as reading them and checking my penmanship. I didn't realize it then, but this proved good training for my time at the firm. After you've taken half an hour or more out of someone's day to interview and get information from him, you should take the time to thank him in writing. As my mom could tell you, it's polite. It shows that you value the interviewee's time as much as he does. It's also professional. Sending someone a few choice words below your corporate letterhead puts your company in a favorable light. My mom taught me to avoid boilerplate thank you notes. "Dear, thank you for the... I will always cherish it" was unacceptable when I was a boy. It's still unacceptable today. That doesn't mean each thank you note you write needs to be a gem of immaculately crafted prose. Just make sure it doesn't read like a computer-generated form letter. I keep the text of a basic thank you note on my hard drive. When I need to write one, I alter it to suit each particular recipient. It takes a few extra seconds, but... Conducting interviews 91. It's worth it. It's also much easier than it was when I was 13, and had to write all those thank you notes by hand. Sometimes a thank you note can yield an unexpected payoff. Every new McKinseyite hears the story of the associate who needs to interview a senior sales executive at an agricultural products company somewhere in America's heartland. When he calls the man saying he's from McKinsey and would like an hour of his time, he receives an effusive welcome from the other end of the line. "Come on down," he is told. When the associate arrives after a long journey, the man shows him a letter on McKinsey stationery from another McKinsey associate, thanking the executive for his time on a day 15 years in the past. The letter has pride of place on the man's office wall, along with his college diploma, hanging in a frame. Sometimes a little politeness goes a long way. 9. Brainstorming. About brainstorming at McKinsey. When the study has been sold, the team assembled, and the preliminary research done, the real work can begin. Brainstorming is the sine qua non of strategic consulting. It's what the clients really buy. Let's face it. Most large, modern corporations are chock full of intelligent, knowledgeable man-agers who are darned good at day-to-day problem solving. McKinsey offers a new mindset, an outsider's view that is not locked into the company way of doing things. That's what clients need when problems cannot be solved within the organization, and it starts in a meeting room with a table, some chairs, a bunch of pads, pens and pencils, some markers, and a clean, white board. Before the first brainstorming session, McKinsey consultants do their homework. Everyone on the team reads the results of the PDNet and library searches. The associates put together and distribute fact packs based on their preliminary research. The ED, the EM, and possibly the more senior associates on the team come up with initial hypotheses that the team will then test to destruction. Brainstorming takes time. Typically, a McKinsey team blocks out 2 hours, if not more, for a brainstorming session. Some team leaders prefer weekends for their meetings, though this is not always looked on favorably by the other members of the team. These sessions often run well into the night, fueled by deliveries of pizza, Chinese food, or sushi, my personal favorite. I even recall some teams bringing in a 6-pack or 2 of beer for a weekend session, presumably to stimulate the flow of ideas. McKinsey's U.S. offices keep menu books of the favored local food delivery services. These books see a lot of use. The most important ingredient for successful brainstorm is a clean slate. There's no point calling a meeting if you're just going to look at the data in the same old way. You have to leave your preconceptions and prejudices at the door of the meeting room. That way, you are free to manipulate the facts in your mind. I like to think of brainstorming as playing with that old puzzle Rubik's Cube. Each fact is a face on one of the small cubes. Turn the faces this way and that, and you'll come up with the answer, or at least an answer. Another metaphor I like to use is shuffling a pack of cards. Each fact is a card. When you first open the pack, all the cards are in order. How boring. Shuffle the cards, or throw them into the air and see how they land. Now you might find some interesting patterns, straights, flushes, full houses. The same thing happens when you toss around facts and ideas. In the next few lessons, we'll take a closer look at the various aspects of brainstorming a la McKinsey, and learn a few tips to make your brainstorming more productive. 94. Working to solve business problems. Proper prior preparation. Although brainstorming has an airy-fairy, college bowl session connotation to some, in reality effective brainstorming requires some hard-nosed advance work. The cardinal rule of brainstorming is that you cannot do it successfully in a vacuum. Before you go into that meeting, you have to know something about the problem you'll be working on. Don't just stride into the meeting expecting to wow everyone with your brilliance. As with all things McKinsey, there is a method to prepare for your brainstorming session, whether you are the leader, or, as some prefer, moderator or facilitator, or just a participant. If you have followed the outline of Part 2 sequentially, that is, you've completed your research, then half your preparation is done already. Now make sure that everyone on the team knows what you know. Put your research into what McKinseyites call a fact pack, a neatly organized summary of the key points and data that you've discovered, and circulate it to your team. If you are the leader, make sure that all your team members put their research into fact packs. Making a fact pack is easy. It doesn't require a detailed structure, just a little thought about what is important and how to show it. Once everyone on the team has read all the fact packs, you'll all have the same knowledge base when it comes time to generate ideas. Once you have absorbed your team's fact base, what next? McKinseyites fall into two camps on this subject. The first group says, familiarize yourself with the outlines of the problem and the data. Don't try to come up with an answer before the session starts. The counterproposition states, always come in with a Brainstorming 95 hypothesis, otherwise, you waste too much time flailing around looking for ideas. I come down firmly between these two assertions, they're both right. If you can come up with a hypothesis, fine. If you're the team leader, you probably ought to have one. Just don't march into the team room saying, this is the answer. The right attitude is, I think this may be how things are. Let's attack this hypothesis as a group. You can also prepare by brainstorming on your own, ahead of time. Rather than come up with a single hypothesis, get an idea of the likely set of hypotheses that your team will come up with, the solutions that fit within the scope of your project. You can then quickly dismiss hypotheses that are unrealistic, while giving your team free rein to work on ideas that are more plausible. This approach keeps your brainstorming grounded in reality, which, as one former McKinsey director observed, is all that is out there. However you go about it, just make sure that, at the very least, you know the facts. Remember the Boy Scout motto, be prepared. In a white room. The point of brainstorming is the generation of new ideas. So start with tabula rasa, a clean slate. When you get your team into the room, leave your preconceptions at the door. Bring the facts you know, but find new ways of looking at them. In the last section, I suggested that you spend a few hours on your own, knocking around the facts and devising a set of hypotheses. Now I'm going to recommend that you come into the brainstorm. 96 Working to solve business problems. ING meeting without any preconceptions. If that seems contradictory to you, well, brainstorming benefits from a few contradict tie-ins, provided they help stimulate your thinking. Again, brainstorming is about generating new ideas. If all the team members come into the room saying the same old things and agreeing with one another, then you've gained nothing and wasted time. Even worse, if the team leader comes in and imposes her view on everyone else, the team has missed an opportunity to achieve a solution that's more creative and, possibly, better. Brainstorming requires the participation of everyone in the room, from the most senior director to the most junior analyst, and there's no guarantee on any given day that the former will have better ideas than the latter. No one should be afraid to speak his mind in the brainstorming room. So, along with your preconcept tie-ins, check your hierarchy and deference at the door. Here's an example of how not to run a brainstorming session. When Kristen Asleson was a new associate, the SEM on her engagement called the team members in for a brainstorming session. When they got there, the SEM said, "Just be quiet and watch me work through the problem on the whiteboard." They then sat there for the next hour watching the SEM think to himself. It may have been instructive, but it wasn't brainstorming, unless it was brainstorming as theater. Here are a few more rules of the road for successful brainstorming. There are no bad ideas. No one should ever hesitate to open her mouth during a brainstorming session for fear of getting zinged with the words, "That's a bad idea." If the idea was sincerely meant, but you disagree with it, take a minute to explain why. Debating ideas is part of the brainstorming process. Who knows? After a few minutes of discussion, it might not seem such a bad idea after all. At least give it a chance. Obviously, ideas that are not. Brainstorming 97. Directed at the problem at hand don't count. For example, let's forget about the problem and go play frisbee, unless you think the team might benefit from a quick game. There are no dumb questions. Just as there are no bad ideas, any question should be taken on its merits. Never be afraid to ask why something is the way it is or is done the way it's done. Often the answer is, well, gee, that's the way we've always done it, which is not a good reason to do much of anything. Never discount the benefits of working through seemingly obvious or simple questions. For example, when I was working on an engagement for a money management company, at our first brainstorming meeting, the brand new associate on our team asked, "How much money is there in the world?" Rather than just saying, "Lots," we spent the next 45 minutes thinking through the dynamics of international money management and came out with some useful insights. Be prepared to kill your babies. This rather shocking notion originated among Hollywood screenwriters. It means that if your idea, no matter how good, is not part of the team's answer at the end of the session, dispense with it. Look upon your hypothesis as just one more datum to throw into the brainstorming mix. Offer it up to your teammates and let them knock it around. It may be right or it may be wrong, but the main thing is that it should help the team think through the problem at hand. Don't invest a lot of your ego in your hypothesis. Don't come to the meeting prepared to die in a ditch defending it. Know when to say when. Brainstorming takes time, but if you stay at it too long, you'll hit the point of rapidly diminishing returns. The consensus among former McKinseyites is that a team can stand about 2 hours of brainstorming before the atmosphere deteriorates. In my opinion, this time frame is especially true of evening sessions. Unless the team is composed completely of night. 98. Working to solve business problems. Owls, people become tired, cranky, and slow off the mark as the night wears on. There are always exceptions, of course. Sometimes you get on a roll and the adrenaline keeps you productive until well past midnight. Sometimes you gain insight by contemplating your colleague's plate of leftover fried rice. In general, though, it's best next day, or the weekend. If you must hold an all-day session, you have to make. Sessions go on tangents, allow people to make jokes and let off steam, but rein them in after a little while to keep them focused. Take breaks every now and then, and not just for lunch, dinner, and calls of nature. If you can take a half-hour walk somewhere, do so. It's a great opportunity for people to gather their thoughts and stretch their legs. Unlike a regular meeting, where someone has the job of taking minutes, brainstorming doesn't lend itself to precise note-taking. Ideas flit around the room like mayflies and can die just as quickly. You cannot, under any circumstances, leave the room and turn off the lights without a permanent record of the outcome. Don't think that, in the rush of coming up with a brilliant idea, you'll never forget it. Once the adrenaline wears off and fatigue sets in, you will. McKinsey uses an excellent device to preserve the outcomes of brainstorming sessions. Although practically every meeting room has a whiteboard and markers that wipe clean with an eraser or paper towel, some have whiteboards that can make paper copies of whatever is written on them. It's an excellent way to get the final copy of that brilliant idea or killer chart you sketched at 2 a.m. You can duplicate this high-tech marvel with low-tech flip charts. The only drawback to flip charts is that marker ink on. Brainstorming 99. To call a halt before the team starts coasting. There's always the allowances to keep the participants' energy level up. Let conver. Get it down on paper. Paper doesn't erase, so be neat. At the end of the meeting, give someone the job of transcribing all the flip charts onto regular paper and circulating copies to the team. Some brainstorming exercises. The key to successful brainstorming is good preparation and a proper frame of mind. Here are a few tricks that McKinseyites use to get the maximum benefit from their brainstorming sessions. While Kristen Asleson was at the firm, she took part in an experimental training program on brainstorming, during which she learned the following exercises. They can help you get your brainstorming seminar off to a good start. The Post-it TM exercise. Give everyone in the room a pad of sticky notes. The participants then write out any relevant ideas they have, one idea per note, and hand them over to the leader, who reads them aloud. This is a very good way to generate a lot of ideas quickly without getting bogged down in discussing each one as it comes out. The flip chart exercise. Put a number of flip charts around the room, each one labeled with a different category or issue. Each team member then goes around the room writing ideas down on the appropriate flip chart. If you like, you can give each team member a different colored marker, so you know whose ideas are whose. Bellyaches up front. Kristen remembers a particularly effective method for handling large-scale brainstorming meetings in a tense atmosphere. 100 working to solve business problems. We invited all the relevant players into a large room to discuss options for change at the client. We asked them to tell us up front everything they didn't like about the program we had presented. Once they had vented, we asked them to come up with things that were good about it, and ways that it could be implemented within their own business units. This required some tough love from our ED. The technique worked in two ways. It yielded some excellent ideas that we would not have otherwise come up with, and it helped a previously skeptical, if not outright hostile, management team buy into McKinsey's solution. One more tip for handling a grumbler or rabble-rouser at a brainstorming session: have the leader or moderator stand behind him, and even touch him on the shoulder occasionally. This lets the troublemaker know that he is being watched. If he mutters an aside, the moderator can ask him to speak up, rather like the teacher who tells the note-passing student, "Why don't you share it with the class?" Try these exercises to jazz up your own brainstorming sessions. You'll be impressed with the results.